much like what happened to me, I was working on the doctor's television show, and I was tipped off that there was a whistleblower inside the CDC named Dr. William Thompson, who was going to come forward and say that they were committing scientific fraud in the vaccine safety studies, specifically the MMR autism study. I made a documentary ultimately about that because, as many of you are aware, I pitched it to my executive producers. I know who you work for. I work for CBS. And they said, we're never going to go near that story. There is no way we are going to do a story that calls out the CDC and says that they're committing fraud of any kind, because we got to go and report on the latest flu epidemic, and they would let us behind the scenes, and we would make it into television, and we're not going to hurt that relationship. We're also not going to go after a product made by Merck, who's just one of the pharmaceutical companies that fund this show and fund most of television. As you well know, if you work in television, somewhere between 50 to 70% of advertising is coming from the pharmaceutical industry, which is why you're mandated to write the things that you write and told the things that you cannot write. So sometimes it takes courage to step out and do investigation beyond that. Let me show you very quickly where that investigation should start for all of you. These are vaccine inserts. I had my COO, Bridget Rasmussen, go by a doctor and say, we'd just like to see some vaccine inserts. Twinrix, I mean, I could read them off, Haverix, Shingrix. They didn't do infants, so we didn't get hepatitis B and those things, but I find it shocking, and you should find it shocking as a reporter, how many times I've read, well, the experts say, when Del Bigtree or Robert Kennedy Jr. says that there's been no placebo-based trials to establish safety prior to licensure, I would probably put money that none of you reporters have ever grabbed one of these and read it. Or if you did, then how did you write, the experts say, that that is misinformation? Because it's written in every single insert that shows up with every single vaccine that you've taken and that our children have been given. And so when people say, is Robert Kennedy Jr. going to take a vaccine away? I would say Robert Kennedy Jr. is going to begin a conversation of transparency, of talking about the actual science that is written in every one of these lists, pages and pages of injuries that are right here, written by the manufacturer by law because they are happening to real children and real people, and no one in front of me right now has ever written about this story. Why? How can you say you're doing your job? Who are you working for? We are supposed to be the fourth branch of government, the fourth estate. We are supposed to challenge these things and say, for how many years will we let these injuries happen before someone decides to make a better product or do a study and figure out, is there a test we can do to see if you're vulnerable to these injuries? We've never studied who these injuries are happening to. Sure, go ask the experts, just like Tony Fauci, who told you social distancing was science, and questioning him was questioning science itself. Just like the vaccine stops transmission, which every single one of you wrote. I don't know how many of you have apologized for getting wrong. But on the high wire one day before anyone, the show that I do online, before anyone received a COVID vaccine, I read the emergency use authorization by the FDA. And it said very clearly, this study could not prove whether or not this vaccine can stop transmission. So what were you writing about? Where was your science, and exactly how do you call the people that got it right the spreaders of misinformation? You have been the spreaders of misinformation. You have gotten it wrong, and America is still waiting for an apology.